Marcus Rodriguez had been living in the Riverside apartments for 3 months, and his neighbors thought they knew everything about him. He was quiet, kept to himself, and seemed like just another middle-aged man trying to blend into the background of suburban life. Every morning, he would leave his small 2-bedroom apartment dressed in casual clothes, carrying what looked like a lunch bag and a worn leather briefcase. The apartment complex was home to all kinds of people. There were young families with screaming children, college students who threw loud parties on weekends, and elderly residents who spent their days watching the comings and goings from their balconies. Marcus fit perfectly into this mix as the unremarkable guy in apartment 4B who never caused any trouble. Mrs. Patterson, an elderly woman who lived across the hall, had tried multiple times to start conversations with him. She would catch him at the mailboxes or in the parking lot, asking innocent questions about where he worked or if he had family in the area. Marcus was always polite but vague in his responses. He would smile, give short answers, and quickly excuse himself. This only made Mrs. Patterson more curious about her mysterious neighbor. The other residents had their own theories about Marcus. Some thought he might be recently divorced, starting over in a new place. Others speculated that he worked in an office somewhere downtown, maybe in accounting or customer service. A few of the younger residents joked that he looked like he could be an undercover security guard at a shopping mall. None of them could have imagined the truth about who Marcus really was. Marcus had deliberately chosen this apartment complex because it was far from his usual circles. He needed a place where he could decompress from his high-stress job, somewhere he could just be a regular person without the weight of his responsibilities following him home. The management company had been understanding when he requested that his lease be under a slightly modified version of his name, and he paid his rent in cash to avoid any paper trails that might compromise his privacy. Every evening, Marcus would return to his apartment, change into comfortable clothes, and spend his time reading, watching television, or working out in the small fitness room that came with the complex. He had installed extra locks on his door and kept his curtains drawn most of the time. To his neighbors, this seemed like the behavior of someone who valued his privacy. Nothing more suspicious than that. The building's maintenance staff knew Marcus as a polite tenant who never complained about anything. When the air conditioning broke during a summer heat wave, he simply opened his windows and used fans. When the elevator was out of service for a week, he took the stairs to the 4th floor without a single complaint. This easygoing attitude made him well liked by the building management, even if he remained a mystery to most residents. Marcus had grown up in this same city, but in a very different neighborhood. His childhood had been spent in the rougher parts of town, where he learned early on how to read people and situations. Those skills had served him well in his career, helping him work his way up through the ranks over the course of 25 years. But now, at 48 years old, he was tired of always being on duty even when he was supposed to be off work. The decision to move to Riverside Apartments had been carefully planned. Marcus had spent weeks researching different neighborhoods, looking for a place that was safe but not too upscale, diverse but not too close to his work environment. He wanted somewhere he could blend in without drawing attention to himself or his real profession. The complex fit all his criteria perfectly. As autumn approached, Marcus had settled into a comfortable routine. His neighbors had stopped trying to figure out his story and had accepted him as just another quiet resident. The building felt peaceful, and for the first time in years, Marcus felt like he could truly relax when he came home. He had no idea that this carefully constructed anonymity was about to be shattered in the most unexpected way possible. Everything changed on a Tuesday evening in October when Sarah Chen was walking home from her job at the local grocery store. Sarah lived in apartment 2A and worked late shifts to pay for her college classes during the day. She was 22 years old, ambitious, and had moved to Riverside Apartments because the rent was affordable and the location was convenient for both work and school. As Sarah approached the apartment complex around 11:30 that night, she noticed a man following her. At first she thought it might be another resident heading home, but when she slowed down to let him pass, he slowed down too. When she sped up, he matched her pace. Her heart began to race as she realized this stranger was deliberately following her. The man was tall and wearing dark clothes with a hood pulled up over his head. Sarah could not see his face clearly, but she could tell he was much larger than her. She was still 2 blocks away from the apartment complex, and the street was mostly empty except for a few parked cars. The streetlights seemed dimmer than usual, casting long shadows that made her feel even more vulnerable. Sarah quickly pulled out her phone and pretended to make a call, hoping the man would lose interest and move on. Instead, he started walking faster, closing the distance between them. She could hear his footsteps getting louder behind her, and panic began to set in. She thought about running, but she was wearing her work shoes, which were not good for running, and she was not sure she could outrun someone with longer legs. When Sarah reached the parking lot of Riverside Apartments, she felt a moment of relief. Surely the man would not follow her into a residential area where other people might see him. But as she hurried toward the main entrance, she realized he was still behind her, now only about 20 feet away. The parking lot was poorly lit, and most of the apartment windows were dark since it was so late. Sarah fumbled with her keys, trying to get to the front door of the building as quickly as possible. Her hands were shaking, making it difficult to find the right key. She could hear the man's footsteps getting closer, and she was sure he was about to grab her. Just as she managed to get her key into the lock, she heard a calm but authoritative voice behind her. "Excuse me, sir. Can I help you with something?" The voice belonged to Marcus, who had appeared seemingly out of nowhere. Sarah turned around and saw her quiet neighbor from the 4th floor standing between her and the stranger. Marcus was not a particularly large man, but there was something about his posture and the way he spoke that made him seem much more intimidating than his casual appearance suggested. The hooded man stopped in his tracks, clearly surprised by Marcus's sudden appearance. For a moment, nobody moved or spoke. Sarah held her breath, not knowing what was going to happen next. The stranger looked back and forth between Marcus and Sarah, as if trying to decide what to do. Marcus took a step closer to the man, and Sarah noticed that he moved with the confidence of someone who was used to being in control of dangerous situations. His voice remained calm but firm as he spoke again. "I think you should move along now. This young lady is just trying to get home safely." The stranger mumbled something under his breath and quickly walked away, disappearing into the darkness beyond the parking lot. Sarah watched him go, hardly believing that the situation had ended so peacefully. She turned to thank Marcus, but he was already heading toward the building entrance, acting as if nothing unusual had happened. Sarah caught up with Marcus as they entered the building together. She was full of questions about how he had known she was in trouble and where he had come from so suddenly. Marcus simply said that he had been coming home from a late dinner and noticed she looked uncomfortable. He suggested that she should always be aware of her surroundings when walking alone at night, and maybe consider asking a friend to pick her up after late shifts. As they rode the elevator together, Sarah studied Marcus more carefully than she ever had before. There was something different about him now, something she had not noticed during their brief previous encounters in the hallway. He carried himself with an air of authority that seemed inconsistent with her image of him as just another quiet resident. When the elevator reached the 2nd floor and Sarah got off, she thanked him again and watched as the doors closed and he continued up to the 4th floor. The next morning, Sarah could not stop thinking about what had happened. She kept replaying the scene in her mind, trying to understand how Marcus had handled the situation so expertly. Most people would have either ignored the situation entirely or gotten involved in a way that might have made things worse. But Marcus had appeared at exactly the right moment and knew exactly what to say to make the dangerous man leave without any violence or confrontation. Sarah decided to do some research about her mysterious neighbor. She started by asking other residents if they knew anything about Marcus, but everyone gave her the same basic information. He was quiet, polite, kept to himself, and nobody really knew what he did for work. Mrs. Patterson mentioned that she had seen him leaving very early some mornings, much earlier than most people would leave for a regular office job. Curious about this detail, Sarah began paying attention to Marcus's schedule. She discovered that Mrs. Patterson was right about the early mornings. Sometimes Marcus would leave his apartment before 6 in the morning, and on those days he looked more serious and purposeful than when she had seen him during his regular evening routines. He would also return home at different times, sometimes in the middle of the afternoon and sometimes very late at night. One Thursday evening, Sarah was in the parking lot loading groceries into her car when she noticed a black sedan with tinted windows parked near the building entrance. 2 men in suits were sitting in the front seats and they appeared to be watching the building. Sarah found this odd because the apartment complex was not the kind of place that usually attracted people in expensive cars and business attire. About 20 minutes later, Marcus came down from his apartment and walked directly to the black sedan. One of the men got out of the passenger seat and handed Marcus a large envelope. They spoke for a few minutes in voices too low for Sarah to hear, and then Marcus went back into the building while the sedan drove away. Sarah was becoming more convinced that her neighbor was involved in something much more significant than a regular job. The following weekend, Sarah was doing laundry in the basement of the building when she overheard a conversation between two maintenance workers. They were discussing how apartment 4B had requested additional security features that were unusual for a typical resident. They mentioned reinforced door frames, special locks, and a request to have the apartment's windows treated with a film that would make it difficult for people to see inside. Sarah also learned from the maintenance workers that Marcus had paid for all these modifications himself and had specifically requested that they not be mentioned to other residents. This information only added to Sarah's growing suspicion that Marcus was not who he appeared to be. She began to wonder if he might be in some kind of witness protection program or working for a government agency. A few days later, Sarah was walking to her car after her evening shift when she noticed the same hooded man from the previous week lurking near the apartment complex again. This time he was standing across the street, partially hidden behind a parked van, but she could see him watching the building. Sarah felt her heart rate increase as she remembered how frightened she had been during their previous encounter. She quickly called the police from her cell phone, reporting that there was a suspicious person who appeared to be watching the apartment building. The dispatcher told her that an officer would be sent to check on the situation. Sarah waited in her car with the doors locked, keeping an eye on the suspicious man while watching for the police to arrive. When the police car pulled up about 10 minutes later, Sarah was surprised to see Marcus walking across the parking lot toward the officers. She watched as he spoke with them briefly, pointing in the direction where the suspicious man had been standing. By the time the officers looked in that direction, however, the man was gone. Sarah got out of her car and approached the group, wanting to thank the officers for responding so quickly. As she got closer, she heard one of the officers addressing Marcus in a way that made her stop in her tracks. The officer called him Chief and was asking for his opinion about how they should handle the situation. Sarah stood frozen behind a parked car, listening as Marcus gave the officers detailed instructions about increased patrols in the area and coordination with detectives who were apparently working on a related case. He spoke with the kind of authority and knowledge that could only come from someone who was deeply involved in law enforcement operations. When the officers drove away, Sarah remained hidden behind the car, trying to process what she had just witnessed. Her quiet, mysterious neighbor, who seemed like just another apartment resident, was apparently someone important enough to be called Chief by police officers. She realized that Marcus was not just any law enforcement officer, but someone high up in the police department hierarchy. As Marcus walked back toward the building, Sarah quietly followed at a distance, her mind racing with questions about who he really was and why he was living in their modest apartment complex while holding such an important position in the police force. Sarah spent the next few days researching online, trying to learn more about the local police department's leadership. She discovered that the city's chief of police was indeed named Marcus Rodriguez, and when she found his official photo on the police department website, she realized it was definitely her neighbor from apartment 4B. The photo showed him in full uniform with numerous awards and commendations displayed on his chest. According to the website, Chief Rodriguez had been with the police department for over 25 years and had worked his way up through every major division. He had started as a patrol officer in some of the city's most challenging neighborhoods and had earned promotions based on his excellent performance in investigations, community relations, and department administration. The biography mentioned that he had received multiple awards for bravery and had been instrumental in solving several high-profile cases. Sarah was amazed to learn that the quiet man who lived across the hall from Mrs. Patterson was responsible for overseeing the entire police force of their mid-sized city. The department employed over 400 officers and staff, and Chief Rodriguez was ultimately responsible for all police operations, budget decisions, and public safety policies. She could not understand why someone with such an important and demanding job would choose to live in a modest apartment complex instead of a house in an upscale neighborhood. The more Sarah thought about it, the more questions she had. She wondered, If Chief Rodriguez was living in the apartment complex as part of some undercover operation, or if there was a personal reason why he wanted to keep his living situation separate from his professional life. She also started to worry about whether the suspicious man who had been following her was connected to Chief Rodriguez's work, and if other residents might be in danger. Sarah decided to approach Marcus directly with her questions, but she wanted to be careful about how she brought up the topic. She did not want to compromise any police operations or put anyone in danger by revealing what she had discovered. She also was not sure how he would react to learning that his carefully maintained anonymity had been discovered by one of his neighbors. Her opportunity came the following Saturday morning when she encountered Marcus in the building's laundry room. He was transferring clothes from a washer to a dryer, dressed in jeans and a casual shirt, looking exactly like any other resident doing weekend chores. Sarah took a deep breath and decided to be direct but respectful in her approach. "Marcus, I hope you don't mind me asking, but I've been wondering about something since last week when you helped me with that man who was following me." Sarah began carefully. "I noticed how the police officers spoke to you when they came to check on the suspicious person, and I couldn't help but do some research about who you are." Marcus stopped what he was doing and looked at Sarah with a serious expression. She could see him mentally calculating how much she might know and what the implications might be. After a moment of silence, he asked her to sit down on one of the benches in the laundry room so they could talk privately. "How much do you know?" Marcus asked quietly, clearly trying to determine whether his cover was completely blown or if there was still a way to maintain some privacy. Sarah told him that she had figured out his identity as the chief of police, but assured him that she had not told anyone else and would not reveal his secret if he did not want her to. Marcus seemed relieved that Sarah was being discreet about her discovery. He explained that he had moved to Riverside Apartments because he needed a place where he could decompress from the intense pressures of his job. Being the chief of police meant that he was constantly dealing with life and death decisions, political pressures, media attention, and the responsibility for the safety of the entire community. "When you're in a position like mine, you never really get to turn off," Marcus explained. "Everyone wants something from you, whether it's officers with problems, city officials with demands, or citizens with complaints. I needed somewhere I could just be a regular person for a few hours each day, somewhere I could think clearly without all the noise and pressure." Marcus told Sarah that he had deliberately chosen an apartment complex where he was unlikely to encounter people from his professional life. He had also taken steps to ensure that his address was not easily traceable to his real identity, using a slightly different name on the lease and paying rent in cash to avoid paper trails that might compromise his privacy. The suspicious man who had been following Sarah was indeed connected to Marcus's work, though not in the way Sarah had imagined. Marcus explained that he had been receiving threats related to a major criminal case that was currently going through the court system. The police department's intelligence unit had identified several individuals who might pose a threat to Marcus, or people close to him. "The man who followed you probably was not trying to hurt you specifically," Marcus told Sarah. "He was most likely trying to figure out my routines and the people I interact with. Unfortunately, by living here, all of you have become potential targets for anyone who wants to get to me." Sarah realized that her discovery of Marcus's identity had put both of them in a difficult position. Marcus could no longer maintain his anonymity, but moving out of the apartment complex might not solve the security issues and could actually make things worse by disrupting established surveillance and protection protocols. After their conversation in the laundry room, Marcus asked Sarah to keep their discussion confidential while he figured out what to do about his living situation. However, Sarah was worried about the safety of the other residents and felt they had a right to know if there was a potential danger in their building. She spent several sleepless nights trying to decide whether to respect Marcus's request for privacy or warn her neighbors about the possible security risks. The decision was made for her 3 days later when Mrs. Patterson knocked on Sarah's door in a state of panic. The elderly woman had been looking out her window that morning when she saw two men in dark clothing trying to break into Marcus's apartment. She had immediately called the police, but by the time officers arrived, the men were gone. Mrs. Patterson was shaken by the incident and wanted to know if Sarah had noticed anything suspicious. Sarah realized she could not keep Marcus's secret any longer, especially if other residents were going to be put in dangerous situations. She told Mrs. Patterson that she needed to speak with Marcus before discussing what had happened, and then she went directly to apartment 4B to find out what was going on. When Marcus answered his door, Sarah could see that his apartment had been ransacked. Furniture was overturned, drawers were pulled out, and papers were scattered everywhere. Marcus looked exhausted and frustrated as he surveyed the damage. He told Sarah that the break-in had happened while he was at work, and that the intruders had been looking for information about his current cases or personal details that could be used against him. "This is exactly what I was afraid would happen," Marcus said as he started cleaning up the mess. "Now everyone in the building is going to be wondering what's going on, and I won't be able to maintain any privacy or security." He explained that the police department's security team had already recommended that he move to a safe house until the current threats were resolved. Sarah helped Marcus gather his scattered belongings while they discussed what to tell the other residents. Marcus was reluctant to reveal his true identity because he knew it would change how everyone in the building treated him. He also worried that having a high-profile police chief living in the complex might make the building a target for other criminals or people with grudges against law enforcement. However, Sarah convinced Marcus that the other residents deserved to know the truth, especially since they might be in danger because of his presence. She suggested that he could speak to everyone honestly about the situation while asking for their discretion and cooperation. Most of the residents were decent people who would probably be understanding and supportive if they knew the full story. That evening, Marcus called a meeting in the building's community room and invited all the residents to attend. About 20 people showed up, including Mrs. Patterson, several young families, college students, and other tenants who had been curious about the morning's police activity. Marcus stood in front of the group, still dressed in his casual clothes, and took a deep breath before beginning to speak. "I want to thank you all for coming tonight, and I need to share some information with you that might come as a surprise," Marcus began. "My name is Marcus Rodriguez, and I am the chief of police for our city. I have been living here for the past few months because I needed a place where I could have some privacy and normalcy outside of my very demanding job." The room fell completely silent as the residents processed this unexpected revelation. Mrs. Patterson's mouth fell open in shock, and several people turned to look at their neighbors with expressions of disbelief. Sarah watched the faces around the room, trying to gauge how people were reacting to the news. Marcus continued by explaining that he had recently received threats related to his work, and that these threats had apparently led to the break-in that morning. He apologized for any danger or inconvenience his presence might have caused and assured everyone that additional security measures were being put in place to protect the building and its residents. "I understand if some of you are uncomfortable with this situation, and I want you to know that I am working with the police department to find alternative arrangements," Marcus said. "In the meantime, there will be increased patrols in the area, and you should feel free to contact me directly if you notice anything suspicious or have any concerns about your safety." The residents asked many questions about how long Marcus had been planning to stay in the building, whether there had been other security incidents they were not aware of, and what precautions they should take to protect themselves. Marcus answered all their questions honestly, acknowledging that his decision to live among them had put them in a difficult position. To Sarah's surprise, most of the residents were supportive of Marcus and grateful for his honesty. Several people thanked him for his service to the community, and Mrs. Patterson said she was proud to have such an important person as her neighbor. A few residents expressed concerns about safety, but they seemed more worried about Marcus's well-being than angry about the potential risks to themselves. Following the community meeting, the atmosphere in Riverside Apartments changed dramatically. What had once been a building full of strangers who politely ignored each other became a close-knit community united by their shared knowledge of Marcus's identity and their desire to support him. The residents organized themselves into an informal neighborhood watch, with people volunteering to keep an eye on the parking lot and report any suspicious activity. Mrs. Patterson appointed herself as Marcus's unofficial guardian, making sure he ate regular meals and checking on him whenever he looked particularly stressed. She would bring him homemade soup and cookies, and she became expert at reading his moods based on how he walked down the hallway. The college students in the building started a group chat where they could quickly alert each other about anything unusual they noticed around the complex, Marcus was initially uncomfortable, with all the attention and concern from his neighbors. He had moved to the apartment complex specifically to avoid the kind of scrutiny and special treatment that came with his position. However, he gradually began to appreciate the genuine care and friendship that the residents offered him. For the first time in years, he felt like he was part of a real community, rather than just someone who happened to live in the same building as other people. The increased security measures implemented by the police department proved to be effective. The patrol cars that regularly drove through the area deterred any further attempts to threaten Marcus or break into his apartment. The suspicious man who had been following Sarah was identified and arrested as part of a larger investigation into the criminal organization that had been making the threats. With the immediate danger removed, Marcus was able to focus on rebuilding his sense of security and privacy. Sarah found that her relationship with Marcus evolved from suspicious curiosity to genuine friendship. They began having regular conversations about everything from local politics to their favorite television shows. Marcus appreciated having someone who knew about his job but was not intimidated by his position, while Sarah enjoyed getting insights into police, work, and community safety from someone with extensive experience. The other residents also developed different relationships with Marcus, now that they knew who he was. Some came to him with questions about neighborhood safety or reports of minor crimes. Others simply enjoyed talking with him about his experiences in law enforcement. Marcus tried to maintain appropriate boundaries between his personal and professional life, but he found that being able to be honest about his work actually made it easier to relax at home. 6 months after the truth about Marcus's identity was revealed, the building had become known throughout the apartment management company as one of the safest and most stable communities in their portfolio. The crime rate in the surrounding neighborhood had decreased significantly, partly due to the increased police presence, but also because the residents had become more vigilant about looking out for each other. Marcus decided to stay in apartment 4B rather than moving to a different location. He had come to realize that his original goal of finding anonymity had been less important than his need for genuine human connections. The residents of Riverside Apartments had given him something he had not expected to find, a support system that allowed him to be both a police chief and a regular person. The experience taught Marcus valuable lessons about community policing and the importance of building trust between law enforcement and the people they serve. He began implementing programs throughout the city that encouraged police officers to develop personal relationships with residents in their patrol areas. These initiatives proved so successful that they were eventually adopted by police departments in other cities. Sarah completed her college degree and was offered a job with the city's Community Development Department, where she worked on programs that brought police officers and residents together to address neighborhood concerns. She often reflected on how discovering Marcus's secret had changed not only their building but also her own career path and understanding of public service. Mrs. Patterson continued to be the unofficial mayor of the apartment complex, organizing social events and making sure that new residents felt welcome and safe. She took great pride in telling people that she lived in the same building as the chief of police, and she never tired of sharing the story of how Marcus had been just another quiet neighbor until circumstances revealed his true identity. The story of Apartment 4B became something of a legend within the police department, with officers often talking about their chief, who chose to live among regular citizens instead of in an isolated mansion. Marcus's decision to maintain his residence at Riverside Apartments sent a powerful message about his commitment to being accessible and connected to the community he served, and it helped bridge the gap between law enforcement and the people they protected.